All right. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Matt Meline from PrairieFire, and I am honored today to have a special guest with us, James Miller. James, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a
You
pleasure to be
bet.
here.
Glad to have you here. So, James has been a mentor of sorts to me over the last few years as I've gone through both the PrairieFire experience that I've explained to many of you, but then also just a personal fitness journey as I've tried to figure out the best way to adapt to my body's aging and all the changes that have come with that and the challenges. And then over time, he's taught me a lot of things too about wellness and again, just been a bit of a mentor to me on the physical side. And we've had an on again, off again where I've followed your yoga practice for a while, then try to do things on my own and then jump back in, which I think you probably see with a few of your practitioners. But along the way, I've learned so much. And I thought it would be a great resource in this time of crisis and trial that many of us are nervous about and feeling lots of angst, to have another voice that you could hear from, one that's been calming to me during this storm, but also has a great bastion of wisdom outside of the traditional financial world, but actually in the world of taking care of ourselves emotionally and physically. So, James, if you wouldn't mind, we'd love to have you share your journey a little bit from Marine Corps personal trainer and now the CEO and founder of Adamantine Yoga.
All right, well, thanks for the introduction.
Okay.
All right, I don't even know where to begin, but I guess we'll start with the whole Marine Corps thing. I was a personal trainer before I even joined the Marine Corps. So fresh out of high school, in high school, I was always the fitness guy. I was at the gym, it was my thing. So as soon as I left high school, I started working at a health club and became a personal trainer and quickly realized that I kind of wasn't heading academically where I wanted to go. And I joined from Illinois, and they had this fantastic program where if you served time in the military, you received free tuition at any state-supported school. And that sounded pretty good. And I was a reader when I was a kid. So every badass, if I could say that, character I ever read in any fiction book was a former Marine, okay? So I didn't even look around. There was no Air Force or Army. It was like straight to the Marine Corps, even though I had no idea what I was doing. So I joined the Marine Corps, spent 4 years there. I was a satellite operator and joint public affairs. So when I left the Marine Corps, I thought I would go into journalism. And I started to go to Northern Illinois University, and I was working very briefly as a reporter. And somehow I just found my way right back into fitness. I opened up a personal training studio very quickly and started to teach people very traditional Western forms of exercise. So running, rudimentary forms of CrossFit, as they existed back in the 90s, lifting weights, those kinds of things. And sooner or later, some of my clients came through having practiced yoga. And at that time, I was really interested in kind of debunking the things that they were doing that weren't working. So I distinctly remember when somebody brought in a yoga videotape, and I tried to move along with it. And I was so bad at it. Like I couldn't touch my toes. I couldn't move from downward dog to even step my foot forward through my hands. I had to grab my foot and pull it forward. And I had a bit of an epiphany moment where I realized suddenly, like, even though I had devoted most of my life and so many of the hours of my days to taking good care of myself, like I wasn't that functional anymore. Something wasn't working. And from that day forward, I really started to devote all of that same energy and attention into yoga. And it led me to where I am today.
Great. So we'll talk more about the practice and kind of how it works and some of those things along the way here. But, we're just in a time of great stress. I see this current challenge is very, very unique. I'm really, really tired of the word unprecedented because I hear it 600 times a day, but it's a time that people aren't used to. And when you incorporate not just the stress of potentially losing a job, of having a family member fall ill, not being able to perhaps communicate with a relative because they're in a nursing facility, it just creates different layers of stress that many of us have experienced. So you've pointed out to me, and many times when we're under stress, we tend to do things that are going to make it worse for us, things that we think will make us feel good but won't. Can you give us a few examples of those?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is I see a pattern with most people that they fall away from the things that are supporting them in times of need. So when they need the techniques and tools that they have available to them to feel the best, that's when they drop these things. So the first thing I want you to watch out for in general is watch out when you start to fade away from things that you know make you feel good. So whatever type of exercise you do, yoga or running or weightlifting, I think we can all recognize that we feel better when we do these things. So they're not, I mean, the word in this conversation, luxury items, probably isn't the right usage. They're not luxury uses of our time. They're essential uses of our time. So we need to lean into them rather than go away from them. But the other thing that most people tend to do is they move towards things that feel like they make us feel better temporarily. And of course, we're thinking about, indulgent foods, indulgent, forms of pleasure like alcohol or anything like this, things that feel good for a short period of time, but they extract some sort of cost. And what we don't realize is that as a result of indulging in these things, we find ourselves less capable of dealing with the actual problems that we have. So we have these kind of peaks and valleys in how we're feeling rather than the kind of stable, vantage point through which we could view these things in a different way. So lean into whatever it is that you already do for self-care that makes you feel good. Don't fall away from it. And then watch falling prey to the things that we might feel make us feel good, but actually extract a toll at the same time.
So many times we take kind of a temporary sugar high of sorts to think that's going to make us feel better. And then in the end, what makes us feel a little bit worse.
It's just not worth it. And I think if there's anything I've learned from my own personal experience is when I don't take care of myself in the highest level, I can't really trust the way that I experience things. But I will think different thoughts and I will have different ideas and different strategies emerge as a result of feeling really good than I will when I don't feel good. So if I'm not giving myself the opportunity to feel good, the situation doesn't necessarily change, but my experience in response to it changes. And that's so important to understand. Like if you're in a really dark place in response to whatever it is you're experiencing individually, do what you can to kind of self-organize. Exercise in some way, eat healthy for 24 hours, 36 hours. You're going to look at the same situation through different eyes.
Interesting. So let's say we do splurge. We drink too much. We have some chocolate cake just because it's sitting around the house and we can't get out. I think diet right now is a challenge for people because you're a little trepidatious to go to the store and buy lots of fresh things and do maybe the things that are going to support you. So if we do splurge, make some mistakes, what's the best way, do you think, to get back on track?
Well, I don't know. I mean, of course, I could say the discipline or something like that, but I think it's the attitude you take towards it. It's more like you need to approach things in almost like a systematic scientific way. This is how I approach every day of my life. Like I don't have any strict regimen, but I'm always curious about like, what can I do to feel better? And sometimes what it takes is falling off the wagon and experiencing like, oh yeah, that doesn't make me feel good. And I think maybe the average person who hasn't spent as much time really observing themselves through a yoga practice as maybe say I have, they might have to look at it in really extreme ways. So, you could use alcohol as a really good example. I mean, everybody knows that if they overindulge in alcohol, they feel like crap the next day. And every once in a while, maybe you need to experience that to remember like, oh yeah, I don't want to feel like that. But I think what most people don't realize is there are shades of that. There are shades all the way up to that, piece of chocolate cake, and all the way up to, other things that maybe seem pretty innocent. So if you treat your days like an experiment and you're curious about how you can feel better, then even the negative experiences can become your teachers. And that's probably the way to dig yourself out without it becoming this big shame or guilt thing, And it doesn't have to be about discipline. Just be curious about how you can feel different and approach every day that way.
So it sounds like a little bit too, just kind of accepting, not the self-judgment and shame and boy, I've really screwed up here. That doesn't really serve you well, does it?
Well, of course, you think in terms of like just being willing to forgive yourself, be kind to yourself, during times like this, give yourself grace and recognize that I think all too often we can think we're navigating something well intellectually, and we don't realize that on a visceral level, on a deeper level, we're experiencing stress. And sometimes that can show up as stress eating or stress indulgent in some way, and forgive yourself for that. And for me, I always look at fresh starts, whether that's, the next morning when I make different decisions or whatever it is,
Yeah.
at the beginning of the week, like whenever it is, to try again and do things differently. You just really have to connect with the idea that it's in your own best interest, not from a point of view of like a disciplinarian, but from the point of view of we all want the same thing. We want to feel our best, and we think we're moving towards feeling better by indulging in these things. But the truth is, it's very temporary. And I think we all recognize that. Like if I eat something I wouldn't normally eat, honestly, like oftentimes 5 minutes later, that experience is over, and I would prefer to feel good the majority of the time rather than for short windows.
Yeah. Okay. So, I help people a lot with their financial affairs, and financial challenges can be very emotional. They can be in times like these when you see your asset values go down, you can feel like you've made a mistake, you've not planned well, take a lot of it personally, just like you can with your own kind of fitness and physical journey. So if people are having emotional challenges around all the financial upset that's going on right now, any suggestions for how to cope with that, ways to think about it, those kind of things?
I mean, I can only think of it through the lens that I view things, okay? And it's probably the only value I can share your audience. And that is that emotional, mental tension is not separate from physical tension. And that's the reason I'm such a believer in yoga. I think we all intuit this in some way. Like when people are feeling really stressed about whatever their personal experience is right now, they're going to notice it show up in their physical body. I mean, we sometimes notice it just as simple as in the muscles, of our face, the muscles around your eyes or the muscles of your cheeks and jaw. For me, it always goes to the muscles of my neck, and I end up having a tight neck. So if you can do things to de-stress your physical body, it will have a direct effect on how you're feeling mentally and emotionally. And that's an incredibly powerful tool once you understand that. I think we understand things like, massage makes us feel more relaxed, but I don't think most people understand how close these tools are to what they can do, what they can access. Doing something as simple as, a 10-minute series of stretches could make you feel different mentally and emotionally. And honestly, that's the best advice I have to offer, because I'm with everybody else and being scared by the market. I know exactly how that feels, but I can tell you, I respond to it differently when I take good care of myself.
Mm-hmm. So, you've had to close your yoga studio now with, the coronavirus and the challenges that Governor Reynolds has asked us all to self-quarantine and those kind of things. Is there anything that you've adapted in the last couple of months with some of the challenges that you've had to face that you think would help the folks that are listening today?
Well, I think on a personal level, I can say that one thing that has not changed, and I think this is important for people to hear, is the daily habits and rituals that I've had all along. I haven't changed. So at my studio, we typically open up at 5:30 in the morning, and that has me getting up at 4 every day. And I get up at 4, I do a specific exercise set in order to prepare myself to teach, and then I'm at class for 3 to 4 hours. Well, now that I don't have to teach anymore, you'd think the first thing I would do would be sleep in like a normal human being, right? But no. I think those rituals and routines are very important, and I continue to get up at 4 in the morning. And the thing that's been so great about that is I've realized that between the hours of 5:30 and 8, now when I'm working behind my desk, is those are the hours that people aren't trying to get my attention. There aren't fresh emails coming in my inbox or texts coming in or Facebook messages. And I'm able to dive deeper into some really important work as a result. So I found that there's value in adhering to the rituals I had before, but rediscovering how I can utilize them. So that's been pretty important to me. The other thing I could offer that might help some people is I already had one foot in the online world. And this is me stepping out of my authoritative area, okay? But I think that we've all become kind of like pseudo experts through the internet about what's going to happen, right? And I think in some ways we've probably stepped into a bit of a new reality. I think there will be ramifications from this that will impact the way we look at the world indefinitely, how we interact with people. And I think there's possibilities that we could see waves of similar things in the future. And it's definitely cause for me to look at my business differently. And I think during this time, we have to ask ourselves, how can we best serve people? How can we serve people at the highest level? And I think that, I'm looking at the online world, putting more energy there now that I'm forced to in some way, and realizing that, more and more people are being called to do work on themselves at home. So it's definitely causing me to reassess my goals moving forward and where I'm putting my energy. And I think the online world for a lot of us, we're starting to look at it more seriously than maybe we ever have before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty amazing the amount of work that you can do virtually when you're forced to, that maybe you
Yeah.
considered before.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think you and I are in the same situation. We're as busy as we've ever been.
Yeah.
Like this is definitely not some kind of coronavirus break. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I feel like it's really caused for me to dig in more and do more work and more energy to serve my community online, which I think a lot of people are discovering. There's ways that we can do this, and perhaps even, believe it or not, better than we were doing in person.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I got to know James. His studio is on Ingersoll, right across from the bank on Wells Fargo that I used to work at, if those of you that have been working with me that long. And so Adamantine Yoga, I'll send the link and stuff in our notes when we send this out. But it's a very unique yoga practice, and it creates a ritual routine that James will continue to accelerate as you get more flexible and or able to attain a certain pose. And so he talks a lot about how he was tight when he first started as a Marine. I still lament my hamstrings and the ability for me to touch my toes, but over time I've been able to. It's little teeny incremental changes, and the value of those is great. And so James, Adamantine, I know that now that we've gone online, you've adapted to that a little bit, like you mentioned, and you talked about your basic training, I think, is going to be coming up soon. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think that at some point I had the realization that, even before this happened, more people were practicing yoga at home than they were in studios, and they needed an individualized approach. So we began to take the program online, and we launched the first basic training in January, this past January, with the intention of launching perhaps just once a year. And I at least had no intention of launching again until early September. But with everything that's happened recently and people being forced to move away from studios back at home, I've realized that the time is now. So we're going to be launching again April 13th. And we basically have a 6-week program that teaches people how to practice at home the Adamantine Yoga sequence. And what's different about it is that it individualizes it. I mean, if you take a group of 30 or 60 people and you try to teach them all the same thing, you end up with this kind of one-size-fits-all approach. You can't even imagine physical therapy being approached this way. But the tools and techniques of yoga are no less powerful. So I've developed an approach where, online at home, we can individualize a program for you that's basically fitting your unique needs. So at the end of 6 weeks, when people graduate, they have a fully functioning home practice.
Awesome. Great. We'll make sure to include that for everybody when it's available. So if you have an interest in that, please let me know, and I'll get you in front of James virtually or in person at some point. So, boy, I sure appreciate you taking this time, James. It's meant a lot to me personally. Your input into my life has been incredibly beneficial. I hope for our folks out there that are having some problems with or challenges with stress and all the ups and downs that this recent coronavirus thing has brought to all of us, that you've heard a couple things today that will help. Before we sign off, is there any good books that you've read recently? I'm a big reader and love to share books from anybody that maybe you would find helpful. Not necessarily timely for right now, but just in the last couple of years that you like.
Well, I'm kind of a bit of a biohacker, if you will. Have you read Dave Asprey's book, Superhuman?
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting book. It's definitely on the cutting edge of what is being thought about these days with just self-care. So I find that to be a pretty interesting book. And then I always go back to the books that kind of were fundamental in me creating what I have, which is the book Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which is a book about the psychology of optimal experience. And then the old standby, Zen and the Art of Archery. I love that book. And it's kind of the defining book about how to use a ritualized practice of any kind, like yoga, in order to become centered in trying times. I think it's very helpful.
Well, I do know of a couple archery buffs in our group here, so I'll make sure they
probably heard of this book. Yeah.
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 So I've got a quote here that somebody sent me today that I just thought was very, very good for these times and challenges. And I'll read this real quick, James, and I'll just ask you for any quick closing thoughts that you might have. So this is from Dr. John DeMartini. And it says, there is no crisis without a blessing, no challenge without an opportunity, no setback without a step forward, and no experience that can't initiate greater meaning. It is not what happens to us that matters as much as how we respond to it. I thought that was really good for what we're all experiencing right now.
I think that's brilliant. I think that there is a blessing in this. And I think innovators, people that think out of the box, people that really look, how can I serve people right now? What skills and abilities do I have to give the world right now? Those people are going to change lives, and not just other people's lives, they're going to change their own. So I think it's a remarkable time in human history to experience. I've said this before very recently. I hope this is the most trying thing we all experience. I hope it is. I hope this is the big one, right? Because if this isn't, wow, you know. But
Sanford says, Wheezy, this is the big one.
This better be it, you know. But this is a time that really tests us, and it challenges us to bring out our best. So I think there are remarkable opportunities right now. And in that regard, it's both a terrifying and exciting time to be alive.
Agreed. All right. Well, thanks again, James. We loved having you. We'll send some follow-up notes to everybody that's been on here, and wish you all the best as we go through these challenging times, and hope we'll be back in the studio here soon because my hamstrings could use it. I'm still practicing at home like you asked me to, but I do like going to the studio.
Very good. Well, I hope to see you there very soon.
Good enough. All right. Take care.
Thank you for having me on.
You bet. Thanks.